Let's say that you start out in New York and you want to drive to Boston. So when you're far away from Boston, what you see on road signs is Boston, keep right. On the big roads, you just know about big destinations. On the smaller roads, you learn about progressively smaller destinations. Okay, so now how do we make all of this fit onto the internet? It turns out, if I'm in San Francisco or New York, and I want to get to Harvard on the internet, I don't need to know which computer at Harvard I want to go to, because when I'm that far away, the only thing I care about is that I'm making progress toward that one gateway that goes to all of Harvard.
Useful? Totally. But the problem was the firms that were laying all this fiber got way ahead of themselves. There was too much building, too much spending, too many companies doing the same thing as each other, with no thought for costs or consequences.
1999 was a wild year, almost impossible to fathom now. From the start of the boom in 1995, there had never been more than 30 internet companies to go public in any given year. In 1999, the total number of internet IPOs was 250. But eBay and Amazon stood head and shoulders above the rest of the dot-com crowd. eBay's market value on the NASDAQ was now $21 billion, and it was even profitable. And while Bezos' company couldn't say the same, it was racking up sales of $1.6 billion a year, and its own market cap was a staggering $37 billion.
Jeff was always saying to us, actually, do not keep your eye on the stock price, which I think was very intelligent of him. You know, do your job here the best you can, do everything you can for the company. I never said to myself, gee, you know, I'm the $10 million book reviewer, because there was clearly such a disconnect between the job you were doing and the rewards you were getting.
Now, as the turn of the millennium drew near, Jeff Bezos was given an accolade that in the past had been accorded to the likes of Mahatma Gandhi, Martin Luther King, and Adolf Hitler. He was named Time Magazine's Person of the Year as the embodiment of e-commerce. For Bezos, this was quite an honor, a sign that he'd been elevated into the pantheon of American business icons. But more cynical minds read it another way, as a sign that the end was nigh. The epicenters of the internet bubble may have been Silicon Valley and Wall Street, but there was one central player who resided in Washington, D.C., the chairman of the Federal Reserve Bank, Alan Greenspan. Though Greenspan famously said that irrational exuberance was fueling the bubble, he'd done precious little during the 1990s to try and prick it. Greenspan believed that technology was creating a new economy, one where the old rules no longer applied. But after witnessing the stock market's crazy run-up in 1999, and after glimpsing signs that the overall economy was dangerously close to overheating, Greenspan decided that the time had finally come to cool things down. In February of 2000, and then again in March, the Fed raised interest rates to their highest level since 1995, moves that signaled that Greenspan was now determined to put the bubble to an end.
At the same time that Greenspan was making his moves, Wall Street began to train a more sober eye on its dot-com darlings. The holiday season that many had expected to bring a rush of revenues into the e-commerce companies had proved a major disappointment. Suddenly, Wall Street began to doubt the wisdom of get big fast, and to suspect that many of the web retailers were nothing but a house of cards, something that programmer and messed-up company chronicler Philip Kaplan had known for some time.
There would be e-commerce sites that we would build where I know that the client would have spent $2, $3, $4 million on these websites. I'd log into the database every now and then and see they had, like, you know, $20 worth of sales, $25 worth of sales, $100 worth of sales.
On April 14th, 1912, the Titanic had its fateful collision with an iceberg and dropped to the bottom of the ocean. And exactly 88 years later, to the day, the internet economy met a similar fate. On what would forever after be known on Wall Street as Black Friday, the NASDAQ fell an astonishing 355 points, bringing to an awful end a week in which the index had fallen by more than 25%, the single greatest collapse in the history of the stock market.
In the wake of Black Friday, it wasn't just the useless startups that found themselves in trouble. Even mighty Amazon was under siege in Wall Street's crosshairs, fighting for its very survival.
For Amazon especially, it was not a foregone conclusion. They got very close to bankruptcy.
As Amazon's shares plummeted, so did Amazon employee James Marcus's paper riches. He was no longer the planet's most wealthy book reviewer.
I was very happy to have all that money, and if there was any way I could get it back, I would get it back in a second.
In December of 1999, Bezos had been named Time Magazine's Man of the Year. But now, just 6 months later, Wall Street was wondering whether Amazon was headed for bankruptcy. A brutal report issued by Lehman Brothers caused the company's stock to fall 19% in a single day. I happened to be with Bezos the very next day at a conference in Aspen, Colorado, and I watched him steadfastly defend his company in a series of TV interviews. It was undoubtedly the lowest point of his career, and the question was whether his defiance was a sign of braveness and farsightedness, or whether he was deep in denial. The answer was far from clear.
In early 2001, Bezos laid off 1,300 employees in what seemed a tragic turnaround for a company that had only recently represented everything that was best about e-tailing.
A decision like this is very painful for everybody at Amazon.com, very distressing at a personal level. It's also clearly the right decision.
18 months after Black Friday, September 11th happened, thus bringing to a conclusive end the long boom that had buoyed the American and indeed the world economy during the 1990s. From its peak above 5,000, the NASDAQ had lost more than 2/3 of its value. Even the most venerable high-tech giants, such as Intel and Sun Microsystems, were now walking wounded, and countless dot-com wunderkinds were now pushing up the daisies. Webvan, dead. Excited Home, dead. TheGlobe.com, Pets.com, Boo.com, dead, dead, dead. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross famously said that in the face of death, there are 5 stages of grief: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. But when it comes to the demise of stock market bubbles, there's an additional stage that comes before acceptance: recrimination. The mourners feel ripped off by the deceased, so they look for someone else to blame, which in this case meant Wall Street. On behalf of irate shareholders, New York's then Attorney General and its current governor, Eliot Spitzer, launched a crusade to reform the IPO industry and punish its supposed villains. His most famous target was Martha Stewart, but coming in a close second was our old friend, Henry Blodgett.
Obviously, people are angry. People lost a ton of money.
Using the critical emails that Blodgett sent as evidence, the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission charged Blodgett with civil securities fraud. He settled without admitting or denying the allegations and was banned from the securities industry for life.
Unfortunately, I can't go into a lot of detail on the emails, but certainly from a larger perspective, yes, I rode the internet wave up incredibly. I was incredibly fortunate in terms of the timing of my being there, and I was optimistic about the right companies at the right time, and so I saw a tremendous benefit from the boom. And then I think probably more than any other analyst felt the brunt of the crash, which was like hitting the rocks full speed.
5 years later, the bitterness over the dot-com bubble has subsided. Acceptance has set in. But for most people looking back on it, the bubble still seems like a moment of temporary insanity, in which lots of good people got fleeced by a bunch of digital future hustlers. All in all, a very bad thing. But there is, in fact, another school of thought, one imbued with a greater sense of historical perspective and economic logic, one that sees the bubble as having had its virtues, and the pain it caused as the price we pay for progress. The great dot-com crash of 2000 and 2001 was indeed great by any standard. Some $3.5 trillion in paper wealth evaporated in the space of 1 year. But it was hardly a unique event. When the railway bubble popped, railroad stocks lost 85% of their value almost overnight. And the collapse of the automobile, canal, and telegraph bubbles caused panic and recession too.
But out of those bubbles came mass communications and the road and railway networks that are so crucial to our daily lives. The same has proven to be the case with e-commerce. A jillion dum-dum.coms may have perished, but a handful of companies have not only survived, but turned into hugely profitable behemoths. You could say, in fact, that Amazon and eBay are the Ford and GM of the web economy.
What Amazon and what eBay did was fundamentally different, and they did it early, they did it aggressively, and they did it extremely well, recognizing that the customer experience was paramount. And that's why they exist today and are the global multinational corporations.
The lessons of both eBay and Amazon, indeed, are that the most successful e-commerce companies did more than just use the web to sell stuff. They understood that you have to use it to give power to ordinary people in ways that are fundamentally different from the old top-down, one-way, one-dimensional, one-size-fits-all mass production ethos that dominated business in the pre-web economy.
A business like eBay is all about empowering the people, regular people, to use the tools in the way that they see fit, and then sort of, stepping back, getting out of the way, and letting the people run with it.
But what about the losers, you might ask? Surely all the pain and suffering and the decimation of wealth outweighed the survival of a few perennials. At the depths of the crash, I put that question to Andy Grove, the legendary chairman of Intel. Grove is a congenital skeptic, and during the dot-com bubble, there had been no louder naysayer. But now Grove argued that the bubble had actually been a good thing. What this incredible valuation craze did, he said, was draw untold sums of billions of dollars into building out the internet infrastructure, everything from fiber optic cable to Amazon's customer database. And while that infrastructure would probably have been built anyway, he went on, it happened over 5 years instead of 15, a huge advantage to America and the world. Grove also made another argument, that the dot-coms had performed an invaluable service by putting the fear of God into brick-and-mortar firms, by forcing them to get serious about the web, to turn themselves into internet companies almost against their will. So the dot-coms didn't die in vain, I asked? No, Grove replied. The dot-coms threw themselves on the bonfire, but they created a bigger flame as a result.
Many jobs were lost, companies failed, but it's also true that out of that, many new companies were created, became durable, and the economy was genuinely transformed.
The concept of creative destruction is famous in economics, and it seems an apt description of what happened in the dot-com era and what's happening now. First a wave of innovation, then a financial mania, then a terrible crash, followed by a golden age built on what remains. Arising out of the dot-com ashes and the successes of Amazon and eBay are a new breed of companies run by a new breed of entrepreneurs.
Who are these entrepreneurs? They're the people who were burned before, and so they have that experience to make sure that they don't make the same mistakes again.
I think it's just, this is what the internet's all about. The internet's about connecting individuals, or connecting individuals to information.
Outside Silicon Valley, it's true. You won't find as much consensus that we're entering a digital golden age. But in a way, that may be the strongest testament to how far the web, and e-commerce in particular, have come in the past decade. The futurist John Seely Brown once observed that when a technology achieves amenity, when it becomes ubiquitous and essential, it disappears. It becomes invisible. Think of electricity. Think of airplanes and automobiles and air conditioning. Like the railroad tracks crisscrossing the country, the web is becoming the foundation of our economy, carrying us along to our destination so smoothly and efficiently, we don't even realize how fast we're moving.